powerful learning experience for me. But this event in particular really hit home, how devastating a wind change can be. If you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, and a wind change moves through. So a really powerful event for me that I've learned a lot from, and through our discussion over the next half an hour or so, we'll talk about why wind changes are so powerful in terms of their combustion and fire intensity on the flank. What else we got here? And then, of course, on Black Saturday, leading up to, on and afterwards, I was working in the State Control Centre with the emergency managers in there, and that was obviously a very devastating day. But to see the impact of when everything aligns in terms of weather, and anti-dry, antecedent conditions, preceding heat wave, and then on the day, obviously, very exceptional temperatures to be exposed to that was pretty powerful. And there's a number of thunderstorm events that this is an interesting one because I was at home at the time, and this was a severe storm that developed about 11 o'clock at night north of Melbourne, and then dumped over 100 millimetres of rain in about an hour as it sort of moved across the suburbs. And it's it's odd for a storm to do that much, to be that powerful at night in terms of the amount of rainfall. But I was at home at the time. And I remember getting a call from the forecast centre at must have been about 2 in the morning, and the 3rd of December was my birthday, so I was sort of thinking someone was playing a joke on me, but it was to come into work and help out with the media that were and trying to explain what had happened in terms of this event, and many others. Large hailstorm storm events and the like. So there's been quite a few events, and happy to talk about any others if people have questions. When I talk about how we do weather forecasting, I always, whenever I present, whether it's at the State Control Centre or any other control centre or provide information about the forecast, the most important thing you can do is get the current weather right. And the only way you're obviously going to do that is by looking out the window. And you'll be pleased to know I am situated right next to a window, even though I do live or work in a big office building. So it's critical to get that situational awareness right, looking outside, and then if you get that right, you communicate that to the people that you're talking to. The wind, how clear the sky is, the temperature, and then you gain people's respect and credibility when you tell people what they already know, and then you launch into the future essentially and talk about what the possibilities are unfolding over time. And that's largely a big part of my role. It's about briefing around the weather and talking about uncertainty. Of course, it'd be lovely if we could get the weather right, but then I'd be out of a job, and Victoria wouldn't be such an interesting place to live. And one of the reasons why the weather can be so changeable in Victoria, it's actually got a lot to do with its latitude. It's in the temperate zone, so quite often we're getting changes of hot air across the equator and the cold air to the south at higher latitudes, exchanging, and that exchange of heat generates wind, and there's a way that heat gets transported through the atmosphere through moisture. And of course, we've got the land and the Southern Ocean. We're surrounded by ocean. So there's all sorts of things going on at all sorts of scales. And some of the scales we know about in terms of the seasons, with the Earth circulating around the sun, and of course, spinning on its axis 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we know that. But what we obviously try to do with weather forecasting is work out, how all the air is circulating, from one place to another. And all the Earth is trying to do is get into balance. It's the old philosophy of life, if you like. Many things in biology and even our existence is all about trying to achieve balance, and the Earth is no different. But unfortunately, it's a sphere and it's spinning, and it'll never ever achieve balance because of that. But what we try and do in terms of simulating the weather is we run what are called numerical weather models, and we create what's a mesh across the surface and at various levels through the atmosphere, a bit like a sieve, if you like, but not only one layer of it. The current weather models have in excess of 70 to 100 layers from the ground all the way to the top of our troposphere, even into the stratosphere. And the models try and simulate what's going on at each of those levels. And when I started with the Bureau of Meteorology, we were running those model simulations with a horizontal resolution of about I think the global models were running at about 60 kilometre resolutions, and the regional ones were running over sort of Australia were about 25. So what I mean by that is trying to work out in each of those little grid boxes what temperature, the winds and the moisture we're doing, not only at the surface but through the atmosphere. And I'll show you later some of the higher resolution modelling that we're doing, that we're running these models now at about 1 kilometre. And that means we can simulate all those weather parameters every kilometre across Victoria. But not only that, the model's simulating that interaction of temperature, wind and moisture every 10 minutes. So we're getting some model simulations every 10 minutes across Victoria. And it's almost like too much information sometimes, and we have to try and work out what is the most important information to look at. So this little diagram just shows you basically what are the numerical models trying to do in a physical way, and each of those grid cells are connected, and then we run this model based on some initial conditions, and we get information from all over the place. Our weather stations, aircraft, satellite imagery, radar, it all gets fed into this model as an initial condition of the Earth and the atmosphere. And then we run it into the future to see how all those interactions take place. So, yeah, it's come a long way. And I sort of think back, I've got a little picture here of how the first supercomputer used to look, like the one on the left there. And this will mean something to some of you, if you're into electronics in any way. But the first supercomputer over in the United Kingdom basically filled a factory. Had 20,000 vacuum tubes and 10,000 capacitors and 5 million hand soldered joints. Incredible, isn't it? Because if you think nowadays, everything's automated in terms of that, creating chips for computers and things. And it ran at about 5,000 computations a second. So, I mean, that in itself seems pretty quick, but it's even our smartphones now probably operate at 10 times that, or if not even more. The current supercomputer, so to be able to do all those computations, provide information every kilometre, not only at the surface but through 70 or more layers in the atmosphere every 10 minutes, when we get that out for a few days, we run that supercomputer, and it does 17,000 trillion computations every second to be able to do that. I know it's too big a number to even.
It's even hard to sort of fathom.
Yeah. So And I'll show you some of the sort of stuff we're getting out of that now. But this helps us obviously understand some of the physical processes going on in the atmosphere. You know, when I started in the early 90s, our models weren't able to really simulate cloud very well. It could capture broad cloud bands reasonably well, but anything of a finer resolution it didn't. Whereas nowadays it can pick up, thunderstorms developing and decaying, and at least gives us an idea of where thunderstorms may develop, or where wind changes might be, at really high resolution. So, most meteorologists are obviously analysing this data to try and ground truth it, and we get various computer model simulations from all over the world now, and a lot of that is even available to people on the internet to look at some of that raw data. And now all that data is analysed and condensed and put into great looking weather apps, whether it's the Bureau or Weather Zone or whichever one you use. It's amazing that you can just get it at your fingertips now. So what I wanted to, this is where I work. If you haven't been into the State Control Centre, certainly if you're in Melbourne and get the opportunity to go in the State Control Centre, please do so, and come and say hi. Obviously, your CFA colleagues will be in there as well. But this is essentially where I work, and this is, I think, the 11 o'clock, what we call the room update, and via EM COP. Quite often that goes live, and I think there might even be a recording of it that you can get from EM COP, and it's not only weather, but it's all functions within the State Control Centre provide a bit of a briefing. It's very high level, of course, compared to what you might see at regional or at incident control centres.
Kev, is there someone on duty from the Bureau 24 hours a day, or?
Yeah, so so that's a really good question. The Bureau of Meteorology itself has an operations centre in Docklands, and that operates 24/7, providing weather analysis and forecasting expertise to marine, aviation, media, all the different industries that you can think of. And so there's always someone there working, or a team of people there working, and that team is responsible for providing the forecast for for Ballarat, for the state forecast for Melbourne, for the people that you hear on ABC radio. They're all pretty much operating out of Melbourne, in that operations centre. In the State Control Centre here, where I work permanently now, and I've been there since about 2009, so for about 11 years. So I'm permanently positioned there. Now, at this time of the year, we're sort of only operational as required for flood and storm with the SES. So we have briefings with them during the week about risk across the state. But formally our operational roster doesn't start till the 1st of October, so in a few days' time, when we will have someone in the State Control Centre every day. So there's a team of technical specialists, and one of those technical specialists is the meteorologist, and from the Bureau of Meteorology. So I'm there permanently, but obviously I can't be there all the time. And so usually there's a colleague that will work out there as well. We try and get meteorologists from the Bureau of Meteorology to work out there for several weeks at a time, so they get that sort of exposure to the emergency services. So yeah, we'll start producing some of you might be familiar with some of the intelligence briefings. So this one here. So this will start being produced from the 1st of October, updated in the morning, in the afternoon, in line with the fire weather forecast that'll be coming out. The one that we do for storm and flood is this one here, and that gets updated about twice a week. And they're both available on EMCOP. You can grab those if you're not familiar with them, but they're basically a one-pager that gives you a good overview, and then obviously you can drill down into your weather applications or METI or whatever you look at to get more detail. So the State Control Centre meteorologist will prepare this, so that'll be me or one of my colleagues. What I wanted to show was, this. I've got so many exciting things to show. You know, I was talking about weather modelling. This will be interesting. So let's have a look at this. So this is a sort of, this is I think, I think this is, we're running this at about 1 kilometre. So what you're looking at here is just sort of wind, and wind speed, and also what have we got up there? I think it's just wind, and the strength of the wind is sort of color coded. But the reason I'm showing this is you can see quite at high resolution a little bit of a wind change moving in through Brisbane into the ranges to the west and pushing across Brisbane. So we're running a model at high resolution to pick up these little wind changes, and they're even capable now of picking up wind changes associated with outflow from thunderstorms as well when we run them at over smaller regions. The reason I show this is because when we look at raw model guidance, and that's all this is, it's assuming that the initial conditions are absolutely perfect and that using those initial conditions, it'll produce a forecast of whatever we're looking at. In this case, we're looking at wind direction and speed at the surface. But in reality, and this is a bit complex here, but what we're looking at here is 16 different simulations of that same wind change that's sort of moving across the landscape in the same area. And they've all got slightly different timings and different strengths. So we have the capability of running, and this is why the model is the computer model simulations, there's so many of them, or whatever trillion there are, is because we're quite often running this model a number of different times based on slightly different initial conditions to see how much variation there is in such as a wind change time, or the strength of a change to a particular location, to see how much variance is. Sometimes the variance is minimal, but sometimes it's quite large, and that helps us communicate uncertainty. You know, we might forecast a wind change at 3 o'clock, but there might be quite a large variation in the time or how quickly it moves across the fireground. So we can use that. You'd be familiar with looking at rainfall output. We sometimes show this in our weather briefings. We look at several different models that simulate the atmosphere. One of them is the Bureau's Access model, and it will come up with a forecast of rainfall for 24 hours, such as this. This is from earlier in the year, and because we run that model a number of different times, we can also look at what we call an ensemble model, and that's what this is. This is the median rainfall that gets produced based on all those different model runs. Sometimes it's a better way of communicating the certainty. If we go back, you can see that was what we call one model run that simulates the atmosphere. You can see it's got some totals in there in excess of 300, and that still is quite valuable information. And then if we look at what's called the ensemble run, it's much more smooth, as you would expect. It's sort of the median of lots of different simulations. And it's when the deterministic and the ensemble runs are very similar that we can be quite confident in the forecast.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're all over the place.
Yes. Do you, as it gets closer to the day, Kev, do the models start to line up to give you some that a little bit firmer guidance, or has there been seasons that have been really difficult to even predict a day out?
Yeah, and it is very much situation based. Like sometimes you can see here, even on our intelligence briefing up the top, we have what's called a confidence bar. Now it's pretty broad brush, of course. We're trying to cover a lot of things with our confidence in the forecast across the whole state. So it is very broad brush. But normally this sort of thing is not unusual, where we see, quite high confidence in the short term, and then in the longer term, the confidence drops. But sometimes there can be so much uncertainty about the next day that we can confidence in how tomorrow, say, is going to unfold can be quite low. And it could be just simply due to the fact that, thunderstorms are forecast, but we're not really sure where they're going to develop or how intense they're going to be. And it might just be some little perturbation in the upper atmosphere that we haven't not fully analysed, that results in the storms blowing up and being really intense. And then in the extended outlook, because there's a nice big juicy high pressure system coming across, we actually can see confidence increasing. So it is very much weather dependent. Overall confidence does tend to decrease with time, but not always. And usually if you're following the briefings, you can get an idea from reading them or listening to the meteorologists how confident they are in a particular situation unfolding. If we think about the event that's unfolding over the next 24 hours, the cold outbreak, that's been communicated, for several days out. So that's been quite high confidence to be able to do that. But it then comes down to the nitty gritty of how low is the snow level going to get, and will we see small hail through Macedon? Some of those little things we're uncertain about.
Is it harder to predict fire weather compared to the weather we're going to experience in the next day or so?
Yes and no. That's a great answer. I'm going to talk about predictability in fire in a moment. It's all very much situation based. I work pretty closely with fire behaviour analysts. I like to think my job's pretty hard, trying to predict how the weather's going to unfold, around anywhere in Victoria, in a couple of hours' time to several days' time. But I sort of think what fire behaviour analysts have to do is they're not only using the uncertainty of the weather, but also the uncertainty of fire behaviour to make predictions. I actually think that their job is a lot harder, making predictions on predictions. But then when we talk about fire, and we'll get there in a moment, I'm a bit like a colt at the gate at the moment. I want to talk about it now. But when we talk about fire, there's certain regimes where fire is very predictable. But there are certain regimes that are usually what we call convectively driven, where fire behaviour predictions are very unpredictable, and then fire management strategies around that are very, very different compared to, say a fuel or terrain or wind-driven fire compared to a convective-driven fire. But before we go there, I'll just sort of finish this modelling side of things off. So we use things like a bit like the fire danger index. We have all sorts of indexes in meteorology that help us identify the intensity of something, and this is called the wind change rate index. And the intensity of a wind change through an area is then colour coded to help us understand the intensity, and that's based on the strength of the winds ahead and behind and the magnitude of the change as it goes from a northerly to a westerly or whatever the change is. So there's all these little things that help us understand the weather. Sometimes they're completely wrong, we have to throw it out, and that's part of my role. Big part of my role is actually ground truthing a lot of this modelling to see how it's performing. And then I think some of you will be fascinated by this. If you think of your weather radar, this is sort of what you're looking at here. Okay, you've got arrows there representing wind direction. We're getting information updated about every half an hour, and it almost looks like what you would see on a radar. And how good is it now that we've got, rainbow radar to sort of fill in that gap in the northwest. But what we're seeing here is our high resolution model trying to simulate what the radar might show you. And this is like a 24-hour forecast in advance. Trying to let you know how showers and storms might develop in 24 hours time. And you can sort of see here, it gets quite active. Because most of you be familiar with interpreting the weather radar, then, using this information becomes easy to interpret as well. Of course, we've got to remember it's just a simulation. It's not reality, but it does help us understand, how things might evolve, the next day. We sometimes show this information in the 1 o'clock teleconferences that we have with the regional controllers and others that jump online, where the meteorologists will share their screen and some and show sometimes imagery like this. So yeah, it's what our numerical models can do now, help us to understand the weather.
Yeah, unreal.
And even this is infrared cloud imagery. So not actually picking, this is from a model, not actually the satellite. So it's picking up the cloud top temperatures, which is what you would see if you were looking at infrared imagery from satellite, not sort of the visual imagery that you can only see during the day. And the reason we show this is because it can sometimes show the thunder, as you can see here, the thunderstorm development that then morphs into a rain band and then moves across central and eastern Victoria. So it's helping us develop this sort of conceptual model of how the weather's going to unfold. So yeah, it's all sorts of cool stuff being developed at the moment. Now, what I wanted to talk about was one of my favourite topics. I talk a lot about convection, yeah? So what do I mean by convection? This sort of stuff. Now, all fires, well, usually, yeah, I think all fires start out pretty small, yeah? And as long as there's fuel to burn, they'll burn. So, we quite often understand what a fuel-driven fire is, and if there's terrain in the mix, as there is through your region, when fire interacts with terrain, we often have a good understanding of how fire moves based on aspect and slope. And then, obviously, if there's wind, that has a important role to play in terms of fire behaviour. And quite often when people talk about a weather-driven fire, usually they're talking about a wind-driven fire, and wind's reasonably predictable unless there's a wind change coming. And so when fires are wind-driven, usually the fire behaviour is quite predictable. We've got a certain wind speed and a direction. You can look up your MacArthur meter and you can know what fuel it's going through. And so you've got a pretty good idea of how that fire will behave, where it'll be in the landscape at certain times. What we're seeing here in this nice little video of a fire, this is at Bribie Island, I think, in Queensland, but it was sent to me recently and I thought it was really cool, is what we call a fire that then starts generating its own cloud, which we call pyrocumulus. Most of you are probably pretty familiar with that. And when that occurs, sometimes they become what's called sort of plume driven. And then the actual plume itself, the cloud on top of the fire is what often drives it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and why that then makes things less predictable, and there's all sorts of things that can go on. So let's call up, this one. You'd be pretty familiar with this image. Should be standard wildfire 101.
Yep, day one.
Yeah, fire behaviour triangle. weather, fuel, and topography. We need all those three things to understand how a fire is going to behave. And of course, the fuel and the topography are set in stone pretty much. We've got a good understanding of those, and we understand that weather's the uncertain one. And if we think of our fire danger indices and the inputs into those, your temperature, your RH, your wind speed, they'll give you an FDI value. And I'm sure if I said to you, look, today the FDI is going to be 25, you've probably got a good idea in your mind of what that would mean if you had a fire start in your patch, of how it would look and how it would move given a certain wind direction. Now, if you look at those variables though, wind temperature and humidity, you look at fuel and you look at topography, they're all at the surface. All right. So basically what we're saying is your fire is going to be pretty much driven by what's going on at the surface. And we know that a fire is three-dimensional. It's four-dimensional because time has a role as well. We know a fire produces a smoke column, and that column goes into the upper atmosphere. So the upper atmosphere has to have some sort of role. So this is the other aspect of weather that has a big role to play. And I know you understand this, but what we'll do is we'll explore this a little bit more, that sort of, the vertical dimension of fire. And we call it convection. Anything that rises under buoyancy, under heat, generates a convection column. And if it remains largely a smoky column, and we have wind direction and speed fairly well predicted, then your fire behaviour and your conceptual model of how it's going to occur usually is not far off the mark. But it's when, and let's have a little look at, let's go back to that, think about that example for a second. I just want you to think about this. I've presented this in a few different forums before, so you might have seen it. Let's say in each of these instances, the fire danger index is 30, but on the left, you've got a convection column that's, say, 1,500 metres. The one in the middle is maybe 3,000 metres high, and maybe the one on the right is 5,000 metres high. But in each instance, the fuel is the same, the terrain is the same, and the FDI is the same. But we wouldn't expect the same fire behaviour, would we? But if you plug the values into your MacArthur meter, you would get the same rate of spread, the same intensity, the same spotting. So we know that this third dimension of the atmosphere has practically it's really important to understand. And we call that the mixing height. Yeah. And the mixing height is in the fire weather forecast. You can actually get it on Metai. There's a lot of places you can get the mixing height, but that's usually a really good guess of how high your convection column is going to go during the afternoon. And you may have heard of something called the continuous Haines index in the forecast. In fact, when we look at the fire weather forecast that's available to you, for each of the districts, there's you can see on the right-hand side, there is mixing height there. Gives you an idea of how high we think air from the ground is going to rise. So if you've got a fire, it's essentially how high the smoke from the ground is going to rise. But you'll also see there's what we call the continuous Haines as well. The continuous Haines just tells us a little bit about the upper atmosphere, and it's meant to complement the MacArthur meter, the fire danger values from the MacArthur meter. MacArthur meter tells you about the surface, what's going on. The continuous Haines tells you a little bit about the upper atmosphere on fire behaviour. And when those values are 11, 12 or 13, that's pretty nasty. That usually means you're going to get massive convection columns. So your understanding then of fire behaviour changes a little bit, or your conceptual model changes, and fire behaviour might be a little bit more meaty than what you might expect.
Yeah,
greater spotting, greater fire intensities, and all those sorts of things. I showed you that video before. I want to show you something else. I want to show you another video. case you're falling asleep. Let's have a look at this one. This is before I start. If you haven't seen this one, this is from the Missoula Fire Lab, where they do all sorts of testing. This is in the States on fire, to learn about fire and see what happens. What they're doing here is they've got some fuel, they're going to light it, and you'll see how it burns. And then what they'll do is they'll put a chimney over it. And anyone who's got a fireplace at home and have seen fire will understand this. But what the video shows is all they've done is focus the convection column over the fire, and they haven't changed anything else. But it's a really good example of the importance of understanding that convection. That's pretty manageable. You'd be able to put that out.
Yes.
I'd be warming my hands on that one.
Yeah.
So we've gone from flame heights of maybe 0.5 metre to now flame heights of 5 metres. So we haven't changed the ambient conditions. The fuel is the same. All we've done is we've focused that convection column upwards. That then has increased the ventilation into it from the side. So as a meteorologist, when I work with fire behaviour analysts, what we're really interested in looking at, is there anything that in the landscape that's going to promote what we call vertical motion above a fire? And there's lots of different mechanisms and that will do that. And one of the ones that you'll be familiar with is obviously a wind change that moves across the fire flank. And I just want to show you a good example of that, if I can get my hands on it. Yeah, this one. And yeah, this one here. This is taken by Steve Grant from the Department of Environment a long time ago, but it just really explains how quickly things can change. And I know you study this in as part of your work that you do as firefighters, but it's a really powerful explanation about the role of that vertical momentum that takes place on a flank of a fire when a wind change hits it. So here we have focus on the line that you can see here running basically east to the west. So we've got a fire moving through the Wimmera here under an easterly airflow. So it's very predictable at this stage. It's got a nice cigar shape, good head on it. It's producing a smoke column. The fuel there you can see is a bit discontinuous, but things are pretty predictable at this stage. We're in an aircraft and we're basically going to move around to the sort of the south, west of the fire. So a little bit to the right. And that's what this next photo is. You can just make out that road we were looking at just on the edge of the fire there. And at this point, what's happened is there's been a wind change or just wind change hitting the fire. So that head, which you were looking at before, just on the left, is now looking like it might become the flank. And that flank, which was on the northern side, is now starting to light up. And when we look at the next photo, which is as the aircraft's moving a little bit further around to the right, you'll see that that northern flank has lit up on a wind change. So we're very quickly, and this is all in about 2 minutes, gone from a head fire, very predictable, to a wind change. It's come through, it's lit up that whole flank. And the winds weren't very strong on this day, really quite light winds. So you can see what's happened here. The whole flank's lit up. And what we've got is enormous energy release from combustion. And that energy release from combustion is what's driving that convection column up, similar to what you saw in that video. Putting the chimney over. And you've got all that air going up. So now, of course, conservation of mass, if you've got all the air going up, it has to be replaced by air at ground level. So suddenly you're getting all this draw coming in into the plume, and that's what's driving the fire behaviour. This is actually outflow from a thunderstorm that was several kilometres away that reached this fire. So it didn't last very long. Once the outflow moved through, the prevailing easterly winds took over, and it went back to doing what it was normally doing.
That's amazing. Couple of footages there. You can even see the flame depth really quickly.
You wouldn't want to be on that flank, would you?
No, but it's also starting to move into a cigar type shape. Even though it's the whole width, you can see it's starting to pull into the centre of the fire. It's an amazing photo. Great photo.
Yeah, it is amazing. And I don't know whether there was any pyro convection on the top at all, but it's just a beautiful 3 sequences, and all taken within a couple of minutes, of how things can change so quickly just on a wind change. But I want to draw it back. It's all to do with this convection and vertical motion, looking at things in the landscape that increase that convection component. And one of the big ones is a wind change. There are one of the reasons we are really concerned about pyrocumulus when the cloud develops on your fire is because the process of going from a smoky column to then a column that's producing that convective cloud on that top, that white, almost cauliflower looking cloud, that adds an enormous amount of buoyancy, and it's almost like someone upstairs has got a super vacuum and sucking a whole heap of air upwards. So if a fire transitions from a smoky fire to one where it develops into a pyrocumulus, or in this case, a pyrocumulonimbus, the difference is a nimbus just generates lightning, is a huge vertical uplift. And just like we saw in that sequence before, we're generating an enormous amount of extra vertical momentum, so therefore the draw has got to increase at the surface. So this is why we're quite concerned about when fires transition from more of a wind-driven smoky fire into a pyroconvective fire, because it's another mechanism for increasing that vertical momentum above the fire. And we've seen this in so many fires now. It's being well predicted in the control centres with fire behaviour analysts. They're right onto this sort of stuff. Even in advance, where we think if it could potentially occur, then management strategies are put in place, and when this starts happening, generally people are taken off the fire ground, because you can see here with this diagram on the left-hand side, you might have, 40, 50, 60 kilometre-hour winds potentially, a northerly, punching into that fire. And then because we've got this massive growth, possibly driven by a pyrocumulus, on the, on the other side of the fire, you might actually be getting winds that are 180 degrees the opposite direction, simply due to the strength of that draw. And I often get asked, what sort of vertical wind speeds can you get within these convection columns? And I'll put it in perspective. Your normal sort of, planned burn fire will generate vertical accelerations of, 5, 10, maybe 20 kilometres an hour at the very most, because usually you don't want too much vertical momentum above something like a planned burn. And then when you get a fire going up a slope, you'll enhance that vertical momentum, 20, maybe even 30 kilometres an hour sometimes, but for very short periods. And they tend not to get too much more than that. When we start seeing something like a pyro cumulus or cumulonimbus develop, that's at least the depth of the smoke plume. So sometimes you'll see fires with a small cloud on the top. We're then not so interested in those. We're looking at fires that generate a convection column of cloud at least the same height as the smoke column. You could be looking at 50 kilometres an hour going up. So of course that's going to be dragging air in. And we believe on some of these big fires, like on Black Saturday, the Canberra fires and things like that, that the vertical winds inside that convection column are of the order of 100 kilometres an hour going up. So they're the horizontal winds, they're the ones just going up. So you can imagine, what 100 kilometres an hour is like.
Yeah,
that's pretty fast.
That is very fast.
It is. And a lot of that has been just through analysis, because it's hard to, you don't really know what's going on inside the fire, except recently, and this only just came across my desk last week, an article, this is from the States, by some researchers on looking at these updrafts within convection columns. And they were measuring, this is in metres per second, but if you convert it, they were basically measuring vertical speeds within these pyroconvective clouds of 200 kilometres an hour going up.
That is unbelievable.
It is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so
Hey, Michelle, are you online?
I am. I was just about to say, Kevin, you've muted somehow. It's not saying mute on the screen, but we can't hear you.
No. It might have frozen. It doesn't say he's muted.
No, sorry, Kev, we still can't hear you. You might have to unshare your screen for a minute. No, we still can't hear you. It just cut out all of a sudden.
Got to 200 kilometres an hour and it turned off.
No, still nothing. Sorry, team. He'll be back on in a minute.
I can see he was trying to join then.
So Kevin, are you there again? Can you chuck your video on if you are? We still can't hear you. I can see that you're unmuted. Sorry all for the technical difficulties. As soon as we can get Kev back on, we will.
It was going along just swimmingly.
While he's off, has anybody got any questions? Or anything that you'd like Kevin to cover?
Is the El Nino going to happen? Or La Nina?
Ah, yeah, good one, Cole. So Hugh, did you get that? Is the El Nino or La Nina going to happen? Yep.
And just Scott from Macedon, the news tonight reported wetter conditions through to almost Christmas. What's expected after Christmas?
Cool. Thanks, Scott. That's I'm interested in that one too.
I can see Michelle, he was trying to join again.
Yeah, I've just let him in. Kevin, you there? Still nothing. Like, I can see that you're there, but I can't hear you again. Oh, sorry, team. So I've got a couple in there. So John looking for a quick update on the predicted fire season. Gary looking up at the percentage predictability for fire weather accuracy decreases as we look further ahead, 1 day versus 5 days. And from Tyler, can we speak about spot weather forecast and when should we use it? All really good questions. All right.
He may be having a dog issue at his end, or it's pulled the connectability from his computer.
Yeah.
It's Scott from Macedon again. If you can hear me, I had problems hearing you before, hearing anyone before. I went into my settings and reverted back to the PC settings, and then went back to my headset settings, which seemed to reset it. So I don't know, it might be worth a try.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Kevin, if you're on and you can hear that. And Doug. No beers tonight. Not yet, anyway.
Too cold for beers, Doug. Should be having a coffee.
Bundy.
You're up for a Bundy, Pete, are you?
Yep, Bundy and a port.
He's always up for those two.
You've got it to rain anyhow, that's one thing.
Oh, it's raining there now, is it, Cole? Yep. Yeah, good. Teams does not have a liquor license, Greg. Not within CFA. So Cheryl has asked what apps everybody uses. Has anyone got some good apps that they like to use when it comes to weather? So I got Willy Weather. Yeah, that's a good one.
Weather Zone.
Yeah, Weather Zone and the Bureau application. There's another one as well that I use a lot, which is the Davis WeatherLink app. And that allows you to connect into private weather stations all around the world. So that often fills in some gaps. So Kev's just said he's going to restart and dial back in. So hopefully he's not too much further away. Thanks, Kevin. So yeah, the WeatherLink app often I'll use in the ICC if I'm doing the situation role, and that fills in gaps. And so I don't look at just a single. And Wonderground is another one. Greg, thank you. They're not there to use as a single point, but you look at the average across them all. Because they're private weather stations, there's not a whole lot of quality control. But if every single weather station in Kyneton, for example, is showing a similar thing, then you can take that as pretty good authenticated private weather. Anyone else?
Just a quick question, Michelle.
Yeah, Rob?
WeatherZone used to have a CFA account that we used to be able to log into, and then it stopped. Is that still around, or is that been and gone? Or?
I haven't used it in a little while. Hugh, do you use the WeatherZone?
No, I haven't. I've never had one for WeatherZone, but I do. I've used the one for the bomb. So
Yeah.
the CFA one for the bomb, but I only have used WeatherZone on my phone.
Yeah.
Not for work purposes. Sorry.
They used to have it on your phone. It used to give you access to the lightning data, but
yeah, I think you had to
It's
pay, Rob. I think if you've got to pay personally to get.
there was there was a CFA log on, and it did have a password, but then it stopped working. I just wondered if it was still continuing, but it doesn't matter. I just
Sorry, mate. I've never had one, so I just normally use the bomb radar tracker.
Yeah, I use WeatherZone and pay $25 a year for it.
Good value, Pete?
I think so.
Yeah, good.
Even a pensioner can afford that.
Yeah.
I'll stop
good.
you, Widget. With the WeatherZone one, though, you can get all your lightning and everything too, Michelle.
Yes, yeah, I have seen that. Yeah.
And
There are a couple of lightning apps. There's they're not so the free ones are not hugely reliable, but they can give you an idea of what's going on. I usually just log in through EMCOP, and we will do a session on EMCOP in the future, so maybe in about 6 weeks' time, and it'll show you how you can get a really good picture of where the lightning's at and how you can use that to find any of your hot spots after a major lightning storm.
yeah, I find the bomb is good with Met-Eye though for your winds and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very
it is.
handy.
It is. I normally have used Fireweb quite a lot for lightning tracker as well. It's as I said, there seems to be lots of products out there, and someone has just told me only in the last day or so that the bomb has got a new app, or an app that was released in the last 2 or 3 weeks. It's really good too, so it might be something to download.
Greg's come on and said Lightning Pro. I'll have to have a look at that one, Greg. And Sophia's asking, how accurate is windy.com? I don't use Windy. That's the same as the Null School. Here comes Kevin again. So I think, Sophia, if it's the same as the one I look at, it's an indication. I don't know if it's truly accurate, but it's generally.
Michelle, can you hear me?
Kevin, we can hear you.
I'm back in town, everyone.
Yay!
Oh, you beauty. Now, look, we'll finish off. Everyone wants to talk about the outlook, so should we? We'll have a quick look at that, shall we?
All right. So I'll just a quick reminder to everyone else to mute their microphones at this point, and I'll turn my video off.
I do apologise, everyone. I'm not sure what happened there. We better share my screen.
I thought the dog might have taken out the connection.
Yeah, well, I used to use the dog as an excuse when I was in high school, but doesn't work. Doesn't cut it with the commissioner anymore. And just so you're aware, I mean, it was the same with Craig Lapsley, but they usually walk past our desk about 7:15 in the morning, and they want an update. So we usually have to start work pretty early because we know they're going to be walking past our desk in the control center pretty early. I want to open, just hang on a sec. This one fortnightly. 23rd. I'll do this. Yeah, that's it. That will do. And I do a lot of this time of year, a lot of climate-related briefings to the emergency sector and other sectors. So, I mean, just to put it in perspective, the initial thinking was, I remember we were trying to look, forward into spring and how it might look, or even winter into spring, and this, going back to autumn, and it looked like at that stage that the Indian Ocean dipole was going to be in full swing by the end of winter. Now that hasn't quite happened. The Indian Ocean dipole is still in a neutral phase, although the expectation is it's trying to get into a negative phase, which tends to mean more rainfall for our part of the world. But of course, the big news is the La Nina and what's going on with the Southern Oscillation, El Nino circulation, the Hadley circulation over in the Pacific. And you've probably seen that in America, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Agency has already called it a La Nina for it's met their criteria and how it influences the America. So as far as they're concerned, it's a La Nina. It hasn't been called that here in Australia yet because it hasn't quite met the triggers. But I do speak with the climate boffins, and they're salivating at the bit. I mean, they're ready to call it a La Nina. It's getting very close, and I suspect it will be next week. And so what that essentially means, I've got a bit of a summary here. When we have the La Nina in full swing, now it doesn't look like it'll be as strong as the one that we had in 2010 to 12, but probably what we would classify, and that was a very strong one. That was probably the strongest for 100 years maybe, but this one that's developing is what they may be classifying as a moderate strength. So we would expect maybe moderate impact in terms of rainfall for southeastern Australia. But it's when it's linked in with a negative Indian Ocean dipole, which again looks like happening, that we've got all this excess moisture to the north of us. Now, most times that doesn't end well. We end up with a big rain event, major flooding. No one knows exactly where, because that depends on the dynamics of the current weather systems that come out of the Southern Ocean, hook up with inland troughs, and then either drag in moisture from the Indian Ocean or directly northwards from north of Queensland, and then drop it, wherever it wants to drop it, whether it's New South Wales or somewhere in Victoria. Now we hope that it's just steady rain over, several days or weeks, but normally within that, there's always going to be some potential for something a bit more nastier than that, and we get 200 or 300 millimetres in 24 hours. Now we hope that doesn't occur, and it's just good saturating rain, but you don't know. We just know that there's a very high probability of getting above average rainfall for we'll have a little look at the latest maps. There's all sorts of climate drivers. This is just from the Bureau's website. You can delve, if you haven't already, you can delve into these in much more detail. But the main ones we tend to focus on of a very much a global circulation context are those Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean, and the Southern Ocean. And we've been analysing the Southern Annular Mode now for decades, but it seems to be getting more prominence in the media and in how we communicate it. But that essentially just links in the frequency and the strength of frontal systems, because often major weather events, not always, but a combination of a front that hooks into what we call an inland trough over central Australia, and quite often those inland troughs are developed because of heat, and if there's excess moisture to the north, it then sucks that in, a bit like the water going down your plug hole. We've got a low pressure system that's just sucking all this moisture towards it, and then if we can get some sort of trough or front to snag it and drag it, then that's when we get over Victoria, then that's when we get the rain. So let's look at Yeah, let's go back to here. All right. So this is the latest. So this is, just sort of run through this. I mean, this is real long-term stuff, and we're still. You would have seen those recent rains through Broken Hill and the like. We thought some of that storm activity might clip Victoria in the north, but much of the heavy rain looked like it went through New South Wales into Queensland. But you know, they haven't seen that sort of rainfall for such a long time, and it's hinting at, I guess, the fact that we were seeing extra moisture and weather systems capturing it just hasn't quite moved further south yet. And if you look at our root zone soil moisture, I mean, this is probably fairly simplistic. You'll know exactly what it's like in your patch, but generally speaking, over the winter months, it's been below average. We did get the odd good fall into the Barwon catchment, but overall, through central and western parts, it's been a little bit less than what we would expect this time of the year. I won't go into all that. So the latest outlook, and again, this is just available from the Bureau's website, so you can drill down if you like. It's still a very strong signal for October. Initially, that signal was more towards September, but again, the Indian Ocean dipole hasn't quite formed, so that's why it's been pushed back. And this looks like when the La Nina will have formed, the Indian Ocean dipole will have formed in a negative phase. And with all that excess moisture, our climate models are picking up that, and got a huge area of above average rainfall across central and eastern parts of Australia. And at this time of the year, when we look at all our forecasts for October, based on the available information, the skill is usually pretty good. And then if we look at this is the 3-month period now. On the right there, you'll see that the chances of above average rainfall continues, you know, even into December. So, I mean, it's not like you can bank the check yet. We know the atmosphere's primed. More likely than not, we'll see above average rainfall. Hope we do, because otherwise the fire season will be starting pretty early in some parts of the state, which I'm not looking forward to, and I'm sure you're not either. And we've already seen fires. We've already seen fires, as you know. So we're sort of hoping this rain comes to fruition, and then it eases off as we head into the latter part of summer. In terms of the latest sort of forecast for rainfall, what we're looking at here are the current forecast that the Bureau of Meteorology's put out on the left, and that's based on analysing all the weather models that are available to us, by correcting them, seeing which one is scoring the best, and then using that to provide the forecast. And then the middle one and the right one are what we call our climate models. Now, they won't pick up things like thunderstorms and that type of thing, but it's using the general circulation in trying to predict rainfall. So what this is actually suggesting, we'll see some rain events. Obviously, there's one unfolding at the moment, and even next week, but nothing huge on the cards as we get into the early part of October, just probably the normal sort of fronts with a bit of rain with them. And so what we can do with our climate models are things like, you know, are there any of the ensemble members of those models predicting rainfall of 10 millimetres or more? And you can see here, we're not seeing that across wide parts of the country. And that's even to mid-October. So
yes.
That would suggest to me that La Nina won't have fully, or we haven't got a weather system yet that'll really hook into that excess moisture, at least in mid-October. So we'll get these weather systems with a bit of rain, but nothing of, you know, biblical proportions, Hugh.
Yes.
Not yet. So that's probably all I want to show, because I've already talked for so long. So we've, you know, the chances of flooding are high, essentially, and, you know, because of that, we're thinking that, you know, the fire season will be delayed to some extent, but be interesting to see what impact that has on the grasses, of course.
Yes.
And when we look at the fire danger index for winter so far, obviously it doesn't have a big role to play in Victoria this time of year. But, you know, compared to last year, it's certainly a lot less for the same time frame. So the trend is for, you know, a later start, you know, based on the forest fire danger index anyway. And many of you will have seen the bushfire outlook, and that'll get updated again come November. But at this stage, there's no, you know, strong signal for an above average fire season. Yeah. Anyway, I could talk forever. I won't.
So if anything, Kev, it sort of looks like if it continues as it is, we all have a lot later start than last year. But after Christmas, and it's sort of looking like it'll potentially be a normal season January onwards.
Yes, I reckon that's a very good summary, Hugh.
Yeah. We just had a couple of questions. That was one of them. Just while you're coming back on, one was about the weather after Christmas, La Nina, El Nino, and I'll just see if Michelle could quickly.
Yeah, I've got the questions here.
Oh, thanks, Michelle.
So, Tyler has asked, when should we use the spot weather forecasts?
So the spot weather, or now renamed now called incident weather forecasts, because we do them for all sorts of emergencies, not just fire. So yeah, it's not really a nice little short way of calling. We used to call spot weather forecast spotties. I don't know, we call these INCIs or something. Anyway, incident weather forecasts. We obviously promote most people to get your incident weather forecast from Met-Eye. You know, the data's been quality controlled. Some people, you know, prefer to use other platforms, which is fine, as long as you're aware of the data that you're using and the limitations that it has. It's all well and good and what you're trained to use. So that's, we suggest people going to that platform first. But then if obviously there's going to be, it looks like a fire that's going to last more than sort of 12 hours or so, and there's, you know, threat to property and life, then that's when you really want to put in an incident weather forecast. And particularly if there's maybe something tricky going on with the weather as well. So what the meteorologist will do, will take that forecast, look at exactly where it is, take into account the local effects, the terrain, winds, look at the upper atmosphere and work out, you know, how much the upper atmosphere is going to play on the where the fire is in the landscape, and then communicate things like mixing height and wind change timing, and then any other risks as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. Did you have another question, Michelle?
Yeah, so it was just about the sense of how the percentage predictability for fire weather accuracy decreases as we look forward. So, if we're looking a bit further ahead, is there how does that predictability decrease?
Look, it is complex, because if we're just talking about the fire danger index, for instance, you know, you put in your temperature, your RH, your wind speed, and say your curing for grasses, and you'll get a number, right? But what we know is that as soon as you're getting grassland values, say above 100, then you only need to put in, you know, some subtle changes like the temperature by 1 or 2 degrees, the relative humidity by 2 or 3%, and say change of wind speed by 5 km an hour, and you can get a jump in FDI of 50. Yes. Just by something that's within probably normal error margins anyway. And we do talk about, you know, latching onto an FDI number and, you know, making that your, you know, what determines everything. But in reality, there's a huge variation that can take place around an FDI value, particularly at those higher ends. I know when we had the Code Red Day on November 21st last year, and I think we were forecasting a value of around 150 or 60 at Swan Hill or something like that, with an average wind speed of 45, temperature of 41, a relative humidity I think of about 7%, and pretty much the temperature and the relative humidity were on the money, but we had a wind speed at one stage of 55 kilometres an hour, and so that pushed the FDI value I think from 160 to 250 just by increasing the wind by 10 k's an hour. So, we talk about being able to predict something with a degree of certainty, but then there's these, huge range of values. What do they mean? You know, but linking, say, a weather day and the confidence of a weather day unfolding, we try and communicate it through things like the intelligence briefings and the verbal briefings we do, and it does change from day to day. Some situations we can be really confident, and then, but obviously it's the detail then, where is the wind change going to come at 2 o'clock or is it going to come at 4 o'clock? That's where, when we're getting closer to the day, where we try and nail it. And sometimes you can't nail it into the day. And if you look at our severe thunderstorm warnings, if we look at what best practice is, it's in the States, it's a 30 to 60 minute warning. If they can do that, that's a win. And, we try and achieve that type of thing here. And you often get asked, well, why can't you predict a severe storm 7 days in advance? And it's got to do with the life cycle of events. You tell me where a fire's going to start the next day.
Yes.
I don't know. Wait till it starts, then you can put the warning out. So a similar thing in some aspects of the weather. We have to wait and see until some things unfold to be able to then provide some degree of predictability.
Fantastic. Was that the last one, Michelle?
That's all I've got. But if you're happy to take any more, Kevin, let us know.
Go for it. Yeah.
So if there's anyone else that wants to ask a question, feel free to turn your camera on and unmute yourself, and you can go ahead and ask. Don't all do it at once.
Sometimes it's easy to put the question in via chat, isn't it? So then
and we were talking about weather apps.
Yeah. Like, I get on whatever weather app. I don't really care if people don't use the Bureau's one. It has gone a big change in the last several months. It's not everyone's happy with, but I think we often get, we like what we're familiar with. So if you're familiar with the weather zone or whatever it is, then you use that app. A lot of the apps use the Bureau Intel anyway, so it's just they're just reformatting it. It's just whatever you feel comfortable with, confident with, and know where the data comes from.
Yep.
If you can tick all those boxes, then use that.
No, that's and we're all got it on our phones nowadays, haven't we? We're all experts, aren't we? So we're all.
I mean, my wife uses the Weather Zone app. I keep telling her. I use the Bureau one, obviously.
We've just had one question come in from Scott. What's the long range forecast from December onwards? So that's looking in advance of 3-4 months going forward.
So the expectation is the La Nina will still be in play. It might be in a weakening phase by then, so the impact on our rainfall might be less. So the climate models are suggesting the trend is towards more. Here we're talking about probably the latter part of January into February. The trend is towards climatology at that time of the year, so you're still going to get your stormy days and that type of thing, but perhaps we don't have access to the moisture as much. I wouldn't rule it out though, because we just need one decaying tropical cyclone. Interestingly, the forecast for tropical cyclones is a little bit less, but the chances that the cyclones will be more intense is greater, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And we know a lot of our rain events at that time of the year can come from a decaying tropical cyclone, so that's always going to be in the mix. Can't predict them in advance, obviously. So yeah, the main message longer term is a return to climatology, but given the excess moisture, you couldn't rule out more more big rain events coming.
More big rain events. Yep.
Interestingly, in La Nina, we tend to get less heat waves
Right.
for Victoria. But as always, a button forecasting. Because it tends to be more humid, it can actually sort of feel warmer. Perhaps we don't get as many 40-degree plus days,
Yes.
but you get more 30-degree days with higher humidity.
Yeah, where you feel clammier and hotter. Yeah, then having a nice breeze on you from the gentle breeze. Yeah. I've just got another question coming, Kev, just from John. He's just wondering, are the slides available on the BOM website? You've mentioned tonight about the BOM website. So are the slides you've been using and the information
yeah, like a lot of them obviously are from training presentations that I do, and the ones that I've shown. If anyone's interested in any of them, I'm happy to package them and send them through. That's no big deal. But what I might do quickly, if you haven't seen the where that climate information is available, I will show you, because it gets updated every week now. And the shorter term stuff gets updated actually twice a week. So what I mean by that, I've just clicked on the climate link on the Bureau's website, and there's a million pages in here, you get lost. But the main one that I've been focusing on is this rainfall outlook product. So this uses the dynamic climate model, and there's the scenarios, there's the chances of a certain amount falling, but I've mostly just looked at the chances above median, and then you can look at weekly time frames out through to the 11th of October. You can look at 2-week time frames, that takes you out to the 18th. So when we look at our 5th to the 18th time frame, you can sort of see there that there's a signal of slightly above average rainfall. But then when we look at the monthly time frame for October, so this is possibly picking up the second half of October, where there's quite a strong signal of above average rainfall. So that's and then there's the 3-monthly one that takes you out to January. Still a positive signal for above average rainfall though.
Yes. Yeah,
that's over the 3 months. That includes November and December.
Great.
So yeah, you can look at all sorts. You can drill in if you want. You can even click on a location like Bendigo, and what it'll do is it'll come up with a little thing like this, tell you what the median is, and what the accuracy is, and things like that.
Awesome.
So quite often you get it. Yeah, you can. I'm sure you can click and get little graphs and stuff, even at the weekly time frame. Yeah, so it's sort of thing. It's talking about what the median is in this week, overall, and then what the probabilities of certain rainfall amounts and what the accuracy is of that forecast.
Fantastic. No, good stuff. It's amazing what's online nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah.
Many hours to be wasted in there.
Oh, well, yes. As I said, still nothing beats looking out the window, though.
That's right.
As much as you like.
At this stage, Kev, we've just come up after 9 o'clock, and we haven't got any more questions. So if you're happy, we might call it a night. But just on behalf of CFA and District 2, thanks for coming on board tonight. We really do appreciate it. Gee, it's great to, as I said, tune in. Fire danger period, 1,300 hours. We are always looking at the weather for the next 4 to 7 days, and planning starts about 4 or 5 days out for those fire weather days. So, but again, look, we've had close to 100 people on tonight. So,
all right, wow.
Yeah, do appreciate.
Oh, mate, I would have had performance anxiety if I knew that at the start.
But no, great work.